Our bulletin this hour, the Constitutional Court has upheld a High Court ruling that the Executive Ethics Code is invalid. Investigative journalism body Amapungane took the matter to court as it doesn't require the disclosure of internal campaign donations. The case involves President Cyril Ramaphosa and his CR17 campaign. Funding for that campaign came under heavy scrutiny over who made donations to him. For more, Amapungane's Executive Director Sam Soul joins us this morning. Good morning, Sam. Thank you very much for your time. So you had approached the Court to confirm the order of constitutional invalidity made by the High Court. You got that confirmation. How do you feel on your continued contribution to democracy, which in this case will allow for citizens to make informed political choices, knowing who has funded whom's ascension to political office?
We're really pleased. It was quite a long battle from when this case started in 2019. We lost in the High Court. The matter was referred to the Constitutional Court by the EFF and the Public Protector, because the whole basis for the case was the Public Protector's report. The Constitutional Court threw out the Public Protector's report and ruled in favor of the President, but said the High Court had not been correct in kind of not considering our arguments on technical grounds, went back to the High Court, and then finally where we were successful, and then finally back to Concord. Mm-hmm. I think what's really nice about the Concord judgment is it really underlines very strongly the importance of transparency and accountability in our democratic framework. Mm-hmm. And this is part of that. And Amabungane has tried to push the boundaries around accountability and transparency in relation to all sorts of areas where disclosure should be improved. And this is another small gain, and hopefully it will set a precedent for something that applies not just to members of the executive, but more widely.
Mm-hmm. No, it's not a small gain, it's a big one, but I love your humility. It's honestly a big, important step here where really, or what you've done is essentially developed the law. It's a multi-layered judgment, but very necessary, I must say, to unpack. If we start with the Executive Ethics Act and work our way to the Code of Ethics itself. If we look at the judgment, the court found that Section 2, subsection 2C of the Act should in fact be interpreted to go beyond the Code of Ethics, particularly if we interpret the words any financial interest. I mean, they were quite scathing, to the point where some thought they're making a few concessions here, that their limited disclosure, that the limited disclosure judgment that pertained to Busiwe Mkhwebane, they felt it was in fact insufficient, the one that they had imposed. So quite a very interesting judgment for them to be that transparent, to say we found that in certain instances that which we imposed was insufficient, if we look now at the Act, which should be seen as wide-ranging.
That's correct. It was a bit of a difficult balancing act, because when the matter came to the Constitutional Court for the first time, the main argument was really about the fight between the President and the Public Protector. And the court ruled there that in terms of the code as it stood, the President was correct in arguing that he didn't have to make a declaration in terms of the CR17 campaign funding, because there had been a separate trust set up, because he didn't have direct control over the funds, it didn't go into his bank account, etc., etc. So on the basis of the code as it stood then, the court said he acted correctly. But when it came back to considering whether the code, in fact, goes wide enough in terms of the Act and in terms of the constitutional imperatives that govern the Act, then the court said no. Maybe the President was correct in terms of the code as it stood, but the code as it stood was not good enough, because it would make it very easy for candidates to set up their funding operation so as to avoid having to make disclosure. And the court said that's not good enough. Mm-hmm. And the Act should be interpreted very widely because of the necessity to prevent politicians from putting themselves or being put in a position where their public duties conflict with their private interests. And the court expressed that very strongly.
But this will not apply retrospectively. That was actually stated in your papers that it wouldn't, because, I mean, it would really then be disadvantaging him because, like we say, if we look at the code at that time, it was very, very narrow. It was inherently limiting what could be looked at and what couldn't. It was only purely dealing with a personal benefit. Then to the argument that some have now been having on social media, where they're saying that perhaps the public protector in this instance was vindicated, she was forward-looking, she was seeking to interpret the act, not necessarily the code. What do you make of all of that?
Look, I think that's opportunistic. You know, I think we thought quite carefully about our decision to intervene at the beginning, because there was a perception, and I think it's been borne out by the Constitutional Court's ruling on the Public Protector's report, that the report was bad in law and contained elements of bad faith. In other words, it was, you know, there were doubts about the motivation behind the report, and by going in, we risked being tainted by some of that implication of bad faith. But we thought that the principle was one worth fighting for, but we also thought that it wasn't realistic to expect this to be retrospective or to have been applied at the time, because we knew that, for instance, there'd been an investigation by Parliament's Oversight Committee when Mmusi Maimane fought a battle for the leadership of the DA. And the Parliamentary Committee was a multi-party parliamentary committee at that time, felt that the meaning of the rules was unclear, and that they couldn't say that he should have declared the donations to his internal campaign. So the law as it stood then was against the interpretation put forward by the public protector, and so we didn't want to fight a battle that we were going to lose.
And then now he's got 12 months to remedy this defect, but that essentially means that if the invalidity is suspended for now for the next 12 months, we've got NASREC coming up, meaning then, at least from my interpretation, that some of the candidates could now have those type of campaigns where the campaign is within arm's length, and then it's not necessarily a personal benefit for them to disclose. Is that what it means?
Yes, look, so there is no formal requirement until the president changes the code. But I think both the parties and people in the legal fraternity could see where this was going. We had a very strong case. And I think, I speak under correction, but as far as I'm aware, the ANC adopted internal rules for this December conference that basically mirror the ruling we've got now, where candidates are required at least to disclose to the ANC funding that they get for this contest. Whether we in the public domain will ever get to see that information, because it's an internal ANC process, that's another matter. But I think things are going in the right direction.
No, Take a Bow was a very, very good push for our democracy. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. That is Sam Soul from Amapongani speaking to us.